Hello everybody, my name is Nicola Peel and I'm going to speak a little bit about the rights of nature and my experiences in one of the most biodiverse places on the planet, Los Cedros. So this idea, this concept of the rights of nature, it goes back hundreds of years where philosophers have discussed and spoken about this. And people that we all know about, like Charles Darwin, has really helped put us back in our place. So the origin of species was where Darwin suggested that we'd come from monkeys, which was exactly what humans needed, because we had come to this place where we had put ourselves, especially white men, as if they were separate from the rest of nature. And the origin of species just said, well, actually, you have just evolved, you're a mammal, like many other species on this planet. And so once again, we became a part of nature. So that book was also kind of, had some kind of environmental morals and ethics for us to learn from. And we look at other people in history who have really helped change the way that we think about nature. Albert Schweitzer, in 1915, he was actually the person that Rachel Carson dedicated Silent Spring to. And he was the first person to speak about reverence for life. And, this idea that to love all of creation, that God had created this creation, and bringing it back into religion, which had been, a large part, a cause of the environmental separation, where this idea that, humans had dominion over the planet and that everything was for our use. And so he was challenging that, saying, well, actually, all life deserves reverence. And another really, one of the most famous American conservationists, Aldo Leopold, who reminded us to think like a mountain. And, I encourage you all sometimes to just imagine that. Imagine to think like a mountain. What does that actually mean? So if we look at the history of rights, and, we go back in time where once upon a time we didn't think indigenous people had rights, or blacks had rights, or gays, or women, or, there were so many parts that we had separated. And over history, we have, one by one, started to discuss, human rights and different kinds of rights. So looking, back through, these movements, which William Wilberforce, who's mainly known as an abolitionist to end slavery and to give all people rights to freedom. And he also was one of the founders of the RSPCA, the Royal Society for the Protection of Animals. Well, back then it wasn't royal, it was just the RSPCA without the R on the front. So he understood that it's not just about slaves having rights, but what about animals? Should animals have protection and have rights as well? So we had the rights of slaves, we had the rights of the blacks, we had the rights of the women to vote, we've had the rights for the LGBTQ community, and are we ready to move into rights for nature? And when we look at nature right now, we generally look at a tree and we think, well, what does that tree do for us? It gives us wood, it gives us shelter, it gives us oxygen. But can we actually look at the tree that has its own intrinsic rights? That it had a life very similar to ours, an oak tree and a baby acorn, and it grew into a little teenage sapling, and then it came into maturity where it also reproduced, and it's had its own journey, its own life cycle. And when philosophers have been questioning about rights, you have some people saying, well, you know, rights to domesticated animals, rights to, you know, those that, you know, that we live with. And others saying, well, no, no, all life should have rights. And what about even clouds, mountains, icicles? So where do we draw the line when we start to talk about rights? If we look at you know, famous speeches during history, and one of the ones that's definitely worth looking into if you haven't already read it, is Chief Seattle's, when the President of America you know, took over their land, and the speech which, you know, he gave to talk about how, you know, to the native people, all life is sacred. You know, the sweat of the horse, the dew in the meadows, that they had this understanding that, you know, they speak about not the bears, but the bear people, the four-leggeds, the winged ones. Animals were people to them, plants were people to them. So they had this advanced idea of everything having its own rights, and for us to respect when we take something from nature, to not take more than we actually need. Because right now, that's what's happening. You know, we are just taking and taking and taking way more than the earth can actually give. Aldo Leopold, he also came out with a quote once: the earth is not only a useful servant, but a living being. Which goes on to, made most famous by James Lovelock and the Gaia hypothesis, the idea of the earth as a living being, looking at the interactions of the earth, the way the rivers are like the rivers, how it's a self-regulating organism. So we've started to question life. And, you know, I sometimes see us like the fleas on a dog. So do the fleas know that they're on a dog? And what does the dog feel about the fleas? Because I see a real kind of correlation between the way that, you know, fleas and humans, you know, we suck the blood, we eat, we excrete, and then we die, and we are on this living organism. So it's very kind of interesting, you know, where we've come to this place now where people are fighting back to protect the earth. Those that have woken up and have realized that, oh yes, we are on this dog, we are on this living organism that we all totally depend upon. So that's a natural part of nature. When something is threatened, it will fight back to survive. That's for its own selfish, you know, I want to live. And that's what we're seeing more and more with this movement of people that are waking up and saying, wow, you know, I want my children, I want my grandchildren to continue to live on this beautiful planet. So where have I been during lockdown? I have, for 20 years, I've worked in the Ecuadorian Amazon. And I was asked to go to a cloud forest called the Los Cedros Biological Reserve. And I was sent there, asked to go there to write a report for the Rainforest Information Centre and the great deep ecologist, John Seed. So I went out intending to go for 5 days and ended up nearly 5 months there. Later to find out that usually we talk about Yasuni in the Ecuadorian Amazon as being one of the most biodiverse area on the planet. But actually, we've now found out that actually this cloud forest, this little tiny jewel in the clouds, has a much higher biodiversity. So it was such a blessing to be somewhere where the rivers are so pure that you can drink water from the waterfalls and the streams. That there are over 350 different kinds of birds. I mean, can we even imagine 350 kinds of birds? There's over 800 kinds of moths. So on a dark night, you would turn the lights on and it was just incredible because the whole wall would be covered in moths and there would hardly be, you wouldn't see two of the same species. To think that there's over 6 kinds of wild cats, including the coastal jaguar. There are nearly 200 species of endangered and vulnerable species, 5 that are critically endangered that live within the reserve. So it really has become like this Noah's Ark, this incredible amount of biodiversity, most of which, or still so much, is unknown. Endemic, only lives in that little area. And so the thought that so much hasn't even been named, it hasn't even been studied, and we could possibly lose this before we even know about it. There have been orchid specialists that say they've noted 200 species, but they expect there to be 400 different species of orchids within the reserve. And when we look at all of this biodiversity and the possibility of like biopharmaceuticals, if we look at it again from an anthropocentric worldview and think, well, why is this reserve important? Not just for the intrinsic value of life itself, but also for the possible medicine in the future. That, you know, we're looking for the next antibiotics. And they're usually quite often found in fungi, most of which have never even been studied in Los Cedros. So there we have the possibility of food, of medicine, of understanding about, through biomimicry, the incredible ways that we can learn from nature, not about nature, but from nature. And when I would walk in the forest at night and there would be glowing mushrooms, I think, well, no, how do they do that? Out of the building blocks of life, you know, how do these mushrooms glow? And there are actually many kind of fireflies and other insects that glow out there. But in many ways, biomimicry and the study of nature can really help us to improve technology, to improve architecture, to improve energy, so much we've still yet to learn. So for us to lose these places which have the highest levels of biodiversity is madness. And so to be living in this place that was so alive, and then to learn that it's got 10,000 acres of primary rainforest, and 2/3 of that has now been under threat from gold mining. The Ecuadorian government has given the land over, although Los Cedros is legally entitled a bosque protector, which means a protected forest. So it has a legal title, and one would think that if it was, you know, a protected forest, it would be protected. But sadly, the pressure of mining the government is saying, well, we need, you know, this for our economic development, and so we're allowing the mining companies to go in. But then we had an exciting change of events, because the Constitutional Court of Ecuador, the highest court in the land, have chosen Los Cedros as a precedent-setting case. Now, Ecuador was the first country to actually give nature rights in its constitution. Bolivia has also. So when you read the Constitution of Ecuador, it's just wonderful. You know, it talks about the rights of Pachamama, the rights of the earth, the rights of the rivers to flow freely, and the rights of people to live in an uncontaminated environment. So these possibilities of actually acknowledging that nature has rights, it's all written down in the Constitution. But however, this has not been held to account. So this case that's coming up with Los Cedros would mean that when we win it, it's not only protecting Los Cedros. There are 186 other bosque protectors, other protected forests within Ecuador, which totals 6 million acres of protected area. And this case would mean that they could not mine in any of those areas. If we win this case, this not only sets a precedent for the rights of nature in Ecuador, but internationally as well. What also is really needed internationally is the law of ecocide, which runs alongside the rights of nature. And we have the law of genocide, but we don't have still the law of ecocide. And it's so important that we note this. Now, what is ecocide? It's the deliberate or negligent destruction of the natural environment. So what we're looking at here of gold mining within this reserve would be classed as an ecocide. So for those of you that don't know much about gold mining, one gold ring takes about 10 tons of earth to be moved. So they will just chop the top of the mountain off, clear everything and mine it. And along with the mining, to separate the gold out, you then have all sorts of other dangerous minerals which are released, and the possibility of spills, which can happen because it is an active area. I mean, I felt 2 earthquakes whilst I was there. When you build a reserve to hold all this waste water, if the concrete cracks and, you know, the dam just is released into these pristine waters, like what happened in Brazil, you know, 300 people died, the river was totally dead. And this goes through all these communities that totally depend on this drinking water. There's no public mains water. The people there drink straight from the streams, and up till now, it is just the best water you could have imagined drinking. And so Los Cedros, another reason it's so important is it protects 4 watersheds. So, you know, we can kind of see that, wow, okay, you know, not only for the rights of all the creatures that live in Los Cedros, and, you know, for almost 5 months that I was there, every day I would see some crazy new little metallic insect or something that was totally camouflaged. And I've actually put an iNaturalist page together, recommended, asked by the scientists, and I've got over 500 observations of different things which I photographed whilst I was in Los Cedros. So to be a part of this absolute vibrant life, and to think that this could possibly be lost and extinction is forever. We have got to wake up to what we're doing, and we start up with habitat conservation of the most important biodiverse areas on the planet. These places must have rights. Rights to exist into the future, rights to reproduce, rights to just live. So for those that haven't heard about the law of ecocide or biomimicry or the rights of nature, I really recommend that you look into this. And there's so much more to see. And I think we're really ready now for this quantum leap to say, okay, you know, the time is now for us to acknowledge we've moved on from human rights to now the rights of nature. So thank you very much, and goodbye.